The dust in the old house settled slowly, thick and gray, like the years themselves. Elias and Maya had bought the sprawling Victorian on Willow Creek for its potential, a structure steeped in the quiet history of a small town that prided itself on stability. They were optimists, armed with sledgehammers and dreams of hardwood floors and open-plan living. For weeks, the work was grueling but satisfying, chipping away at layers of faded wallpaper and questionable architectural choices. They uncovered nothing more remarkable than rusted plumbing and the faint, sweet scent of long-gone potpourri. It was Maya who first noticed the anomaly. The attic, a cavernous, poorly lit space under the eaves, was primarily used for storing seasonal decorations and stacks of yellowed tax records. But tucked away at the far end behind a large cedar chest was a door that didn't match the others. It was narrower, made of heavy dark oak, and secured not with a simple latch, but with a bulky, old-fashioned brass padlock. The lock was coated in a patina of age, suggesting it hadn't been opened in decades. A shiver, not of cold, but of pure, childish curiosity, ran down Maya's spine. Why would anyone go to such lengths to secure a small storage space in the far corner of an attic? Elias tried the standard methods, prying, shaking, and examining the hinges. The door was solid, the lock uncompromising. It felt less like a storage closet and more like a vault. The mystery intensified. Elias, ever practical, decided to cut the lock off, but Maya stopped him. She had a feeling, a whisper of intuition, suggesting the key still existed somewhere in the house, perhaps deliberately hidden. They spent the next 3 days hunting. They meticulously checked every drawer, every coat pocket in the hall closet, even the lining of the dusty old cedar chest that had concealed the door itself. Elias found a rusted tin of vintage sewing supplies, but no key. Maya started exploring the exterior of the house, focusing on the foundation and the deep shaded flower beds near the back porch. The previous owner, a reclusive elderly man, would have lived there alone for decades, and the house felt like a library of secrets, each room a silent chapter. On the 4th day, as Elias was removing a cumbersome, built-in bookshelf in the downstairs study structure, clearly added, later he heard a faint tink sound. Behind the heavy wooden facade, wedged deep into a cavity in the original plaster wall, lay a small, tarnished silver box, no bigger than a deck of cards. The box was sealed with a small latch. Inside, nestled on a square of faded velvet, was a single key. It was not brass like the padlock, but steel, precisely cut and worn smooth by time. They raced upstairs, the key heavy in Elias's palm. The steel key slid into the brass lock with surprising ease, turning with a loud, protesting click that echoed through the quiet attic. The sound was momentous, the breaking of a 15-year silence. Elias pulled the heavy door open, revealing the small, pitch-black chamber. The room was tiny and stifling, the air thick with the smell of old plastic and ozone. It was bare, save for 2 items. Leaning against the back wall was a tripod, folded shut. Resting on the dusty wooden floor, partially obscured by a drop cloth, was a small brick-like object, an early model digital video camera. It was an artifact from the past, its gray plastic casing slightly warped and its small screen completely dark. Next to it was a small, unlabeled tape cassette. The silence of the room was oppressive, charged with an unknown history. Elias lifted the camera, brushing away the grime. It was cold to the touch. Maya found the power cord tucked behind the tripod. They brought the relics down to the sunlit living room, plugging the camera into the wall socket. They waited, their hearts thudding in unison, as the small orange light on the device flickered, then held steady. The camera was alive. Elias ejected the tape cartridge, finding it already inside the machine. There was a label on the cartridge, written in hurried block letters, Vidia. Pulling up a decades-old news story, the high-profile murder of a local district attorney, Victor Dale Alexander. The case that had rocked the town and ended in the conviction of the powerful young politician Thomas Vance. Elias pressed the play button. The screen sputtered to life, showing only static for a moment. Then an image snapped into sharp focus. A poorly lit, cramped office space, cluttered with papers and campaign posters. The camera was unsteady, placed low on a shelf. A nervous man in an expensive suit was speaking urgently on a phone, his back mostly to the lens. The clock on the wall read 2:45 a.m. The date stamped in the corner confirmed it was the night of Vidia's murder. They watched, frozen, as the man hung up, turned, and pulled a hidden key from his own desk drawer. The man on the screen was Patrick Gorman, Thomas Vance's campaign manager, as Gorman began to meticulously wipe down the office doorknobs and remove a pair of latex gloves from a briefcase. The camera angle shifted slightly, and for the first time, they saw the victim, Victor Dale Alexander, slumped over his own desk, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. Patrick Gorman, with a sickeningly casual air, opened the office safe, deposited something small and metallic, and then locked it, pocketing the key. He pulled out a piece of paper, scribbled a note. The final shot was of Gorman meticulously adjusting a hair on the victim's coat, a chilling act of staging before he quietly slipped out of the room. Leaving the door ajar, Elias's hand trembled as he reached for the stop button. The implications were staggering. They had just witnessed not the evidence against the convicted politician, but the cold, calculated actions of his campaign manager, Patrick Gorman. The footage was pristine, undeniable proof that Thomas Vance, who had served 15 years in prison, was innocent. The camera, hidden away for a decade and a half, held the truth of a political conspiracy and a frame-up. They looked at each other, the weight of a monumental injustice settling heavily between them. They were no longer just renovating a house. They were sitting on a ticking time bomb of small-town secrets. Who else knew about this camera, and why did they hide it instead of destroying it? The silence following the end of the tape was profound, broken only by the frantic worry of the old camera's internal gears. Elias and Maya sat motionless, the image of Patrick Gorman calmly arranging the scene of a murder burned into their minds. The bright afternoon sunlight streaming through their living room window now felt jarring, a cruel contrast to the sinister tableau they had just witnessed. They had stumbled into a 15-year-old vortex of political malice and calculated betrayal. The evidence was overwhelming, yet the path forward felt impossible. Shrouded in the threat of powerful opposition, their first instinct was a fearful, shared desire to relock the camera in the attic and forget the entire discovery. They were not detectives, not heroes, merely a couple seeking a quiet life in a new town. But the face of Thomas Vance, the framed politician, flashed across Elias's mind, the mugshot they had quickly searched online, the haunted eyes of a man stripped of his future. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on their conscience. They couldn't unsee what they had seen. They spent the next few hours meticulously securing the evidence. Maya, driven by a desperate need for preservation, carefully removed the tape from the camera, sealing it in a thick plastic container. Elias scoured the internet for information on the original trial. The news articles were unanimous. Thomas Vance, ambitious and arrogant, was convicted primarily on circumstantial evidence and a scathing testimony from his campaign manager, Patrick Gorman. Gorman had testified that Vance was jealous of the victim, Victor Dale Alexander, and had been seen leaving Alexander's office building late on the night of the murder. Gorman had been lauded as a reluctant hero, a man who had put his civic duty before his loyalty to a friend. The discrepancy was horrifying. The script Gorman had fed the police, and the jury was the exact opposite of the silent, damning footage. The video showed Gorman entering the office long after Vance had supposedly left, staging the scene to match the fabricated timeline. He had manufactured the motive, planted the weapon, likely the small, metallic item he had put in the syphon, then delivered the performance of a lifetime on the stand. As night fell, a new layer of fear crept in. If Patrick Gorman was capable of framing an associate for murder, he was certainly capable of silencing to ordinary people who now held the key to his freedom and reputation. They became paranoid within their own home. Every creaking floorboard, every rattling window pane sent a jolt of terror through them. They moved the camera and the tape from the living room to their bedroom, hiding them under a loose floorboard Elias had been planning to repair. The next morning, they drove 30 miles outside of town to a secure office supply store to purchase equipment for digital preservation. They understood that the analog tape was fragile and could be easily damaged or seized. Elias, an amateur tech enthusiast, worked for 12 straight hours, running the footage through specialized equipment, converting the dated videotape into multiple encrypted digital files. The quality, though grainy, was undeniable. The timestamp, the figure of Gorman, the staging it, was all perfectly preserved. Now they faced the critical, terrifying question: who to trust? The local police department was the original jurisdiction that had bungled, or perhaps been complicit in, the initial investigation. The state prosecutor's office had secured the conviction. Patrick Gorman, the man they now knew to be a murderer, was not just a campaign manager anymore. A quick search revealed he had leveraged his heroic testimony and political connections to become a highly successful lobbyist in the state capital. A man with deep pockets and influence. He was untouchable, Maya suggested, finding Thomas Vance's former defense attorney. But Elias argued that approaching the legal system directly might allow Gorman's powerful contacts to suppress the evidence before it ever reached a judge. They needed a shockwave, a public detonation that would force the system to react before it could cover up its own rot. Their focus narrowed to the man still paying the ultimate price, Thomas Vance. Where was he? A quick prison search revealed he was incarcerated in a maximum security facility 300 miles away. His family, they discovered, had been publicly shamed and had moved out of the state shortly after the conviction. He was alone, forgotten. Elias began composing an anonymous letter, careful to use an untraceable public Wi-Fi connection in a neighboring town. He didn't include the footage, only highly specific, non-public details from the tape, the exact time the clock stopped, the specific brand of gloves Gorman wore, the position of the victim's misplaced cuffling. He knew these details would confirm to the family or a trusted investigator that the sender possessed the truth. The letter was addressed to the last known residence of Thomas Vance's estranged sister, Cassandra Vance, the only family member who had openly continued to fight for his innocence. As Elias sealed the envelope, a terrible realization washed over Maya. The small, tarnished steel key they had found behind the bookshelf. It fit the brass lock on the attic door, securing the camera. But where was the original brass key that had opened the lock for Gorman? and more chillingly, who had taken the steel key and hidden it behind the bookshelf for 15 years, only for them to find it. The original owner of the house had died months before they purchased it. Had he hidden the camera, or had he simply concealed the key, intending for the truth to be found one day? They looked at the steel key again, no longer an antique curiosity, but a deliberate marker. The person who hid it was either trying to protect the evidence or ensuring that the terrible truth would eventually be revealed. And that person, they suddenly realized, had lived in this house, watching the conspiracy unfold, for 15 years. If the previous owner knew the truth, why didn't he go to the authorities? And was the hiding of the key his final, silent act of revenge? The letter, carefully sealed and anonymously mailed from a far-flung mailbox, was now hurtling toward its destination, carrying the spark of a long-dormant fire. Elias and Maya waited, the tense silence in their home amplifying the suspense. They had done the only thing they dared, passed the torch of truth to the one person who had earned the right to wield it. Cassandra Vance. Cassandra, Thomas Vance's sister, lived a life perpetually overshadowed by the tragedy of her brother's conviction. She had been a promising lawyer herself, but the shame, the crushing legal fees, and the widespread public scorn had forced her to abandon her career and retreat into obscurity. She worked a modest job, her evenings consumed by the quiet, ceaseless grief of injustice. Every appeal had been denied, every request for a new trial blocked by the iron wall of Patrick, Gorman's influence, and the state's unwillingness to admit error. When the plain white envelope arrived, Cassandra almost discarded it, assuming it was another piece of junk mail, or worse, a hateful note. The envelope felt thick, substantial. Inside, she found the single sheet of paper containing cryptic yet startlingly specific details. 3:03 a.m. stopped time. Gorman's bespoke cufflink, found by the victim's hand, not Vance's, the small key deposited in the safe. Her heart, which had been numb for 15 years, began to beat with a painful, frantic energy. These were not public facts. The cufflink detail, in particular, had been a key piece of circumstantial evidence linking Thomas to the crime, planted, according to the prosecution, when Thomas was staging the scene. Now, this letter suggested the exact opposite. Someone knew the truth. Someone possessed knowledge that could rip open the coffin of her brother's case. Cassandra was cautious. Years of disappointment had taught her to trust no one. She immediately began researching the source of the details, attempting to cross-reference them with the sealed police reports she had unsuccessfully fought to obtain over the years. The more she dug, the more the anonymous letter resonated with a horrifying plausibility. The detail about the safe key was especially unnerving. The prosecution had focused on the missing murder weapon, but had never discussed the safe's contents or the keys involved. Meanwhile, Elias and Maya were observing the ripples of their action. They scoured local news archives and social media, watching for any sign of change in the political landscape or any mention of Thomas Vance's case being reopened. The town remained placid, the conspiracy holding firm. The silence was unnerving, suggesting either that Cassandra hadn't acted yet, or that she was moving with extreme caution. Realizing the impossibility of proving the letter's claims without concrete evidence, knew she had to take the ultimate risk. She had to approach Patrick Gorman, not with an accusation, but with a plea. She arranged an appointment under a false pretense, claiming she was offering him a consulting opportunity for an advocacy group she was supposedly starting. She needed to look him in the eye, to gauge the coldness of the man who had destroyed her family. The meeting took place in Gorman's opulent, glass-walled office in the state capitol. He was older now, smoother, his hair a distinguished silver, his demeanor radiating success and self-satisfaction. He was everything Thomas Vance should have been. As they spoke, Cassandra guided the conversation, subtly dropping veiled references to the night of the murder, observing his micro-expressions. When she mentioned the unsolved mysteries of the case, Gorman's smile remained fixed, but his eyes flashed with a brief, terrifying, predatory awareness. He dismissed her proposal with patronizing courtesy. But as she stood to leave, Gorman leaned forward, his voice dropping to a silken, chilling whisper. He reminded her, without ever explicitly threatening her, that some things are better left buried for the sake of one's own peace. He spoke about the fragility of evidence and the ease with which old records can disappear. Cassandra left the office, her body trembling, realizing the anonymous letter was not just exposing a killer, but taking aim at a man who was now frighteningly powerful and utterly ruthless. Her resolve solidified. Gorman's subtle threat was proof enough that the anonymous letter was real, that the details pointed to a secret he was still fiercely protecting. She knew she could not go to the police. Gorman would crush her and the evidence before she ever reached the door. She had to find the anonymous source, and, more importantly, the definitive proof they possessed. Cassandra began to focus her search on the town where the murder occurred, specifically looking for anyone who might have been an associate of the former district attorney, Victor Dale Alexander, or someone connected to the property where the crime was staged. She eventually traced the history of the house. Adjacent to the district attorney's office, the very home where Elias and Maya lived, and discovered that the previous owner, Mr. Harrison, had been VDA's closest confidant. Mr. Harrison had died only recently. The timing was too perfect, too coincidental. The silent question hanging over Elias and Mayawi, did the old owner hide the key, was about to be answered by the arrival of Cassandra Vance. She drove toward Willow Creek, not knowing if the new owners were friends or foes, but knowing that the old Victorian house held the final, hidden piece of the puzzle, a street she hadn't visited in 15 years. She saw the renovation work on the old Harrison house. A young couple was carrying lumber onto the porch. She parked, her heart pounding against her ribs, sensing the end of her long, dark quest. She was about to confront the possibility of hope or the certainty of a new and terrible danger. Had Mr. Harrison, VDA's confidant, recorded Gorman's actions on the night of the murder? And if so, was Cassandra's arrival the final stage of his silent revenge? Cassandra Vance approached the freshly painted porch of the old Victorian house. Her hands clammy, her facade carefully constructed, she introduced herself simply, claiming she was researching the history of the neighborhood for a book, and was particularly interested in the life of the previous owner. Mr. Harrison. She watched Elias and Maya carefully, noting the slight shift in their eyes, the shared, subtle tension that immediately betrayed their nervousness. They knew something. Elias, though wary, found himself immediately drawn to Cassandra's intensity. She carried the heavy mantle of 15 years of suffering, a quiet authority born from injustice. He recognized the desperate hope in her guarded expression. He and Maya had already decided that if someone came asking with the right knowledge, they would reveal the truth. They needed to gauge how much Cassandra already suspected. Maya took the lead, steering Cassandra toward the study, the room where the key had been found. She casually mentioned the extensive renovations and the strange things they'd uncovered. Cassandra listened intently, her gaze sweeping over the removed bookshelf, focusing on the newly plastered section of the wall where the silver box had rested. She mentioned that her brother, Thomas, had often visited Mr. Harrison, his mentor, and hinted that she believed Harrison might have known something about the events surrounding the murder. The moment Maya mentioned the discovery of a small, hidden key behind the wall, Cassandra's breath hitched. That was the trigger, the confirmation she needed. Her carefully contained composure crumbled. She looked directly at Elias, the pain and pleading in her eyes demanding honesty. She spoke the precise, non-public details from the anonymous letter, the 3:03 a.m. clock, and the planted cufflink. The air was thick with shared recognition. Elias knew the time for pretense was over. He described the locked attic room, the antique padlock, and the dusty digital camera found inside. As he recounted the memory of the grainy, unsettling footage, Maya watched Cassandra. Tears welled in Cassandra's eyes, not of sorrow, but of fierce, agonizing relief. For 15 years, she had carried the solitary burden of her brother's innocence. Now the world was cracking open. Elias led Cassandra to their bedroom, pulled up the loose floorboard, and retrieved the encrypted files. He connected the laptop to the television and, for the second time, pressed play. They watched together as Patrick Gorman, the man Cassandra had just faced in his sleek office, calmly and methodically staged the perfect crime. Cassandra recognized the specific angle of the camera, realizing it must have been concealed within the lighting fixture or an air vent, placed there intentionally by Mr. Harrison, who was VDA's trusted friend. Harrison hadn't just known the truth. He had recorded it. As the footage finished, Cassandra covered her mouth, a silent, guttural cry of vindication escaping her. Her pain quickly transformed into cold, laser-focused resolve. She understood the entire, devastating picture. Gorman had killed the district attorney, framed Thomas, and then leveraged his heroic testimony to build his own successful. Mr. Harrison had recorded the betrayal, but couldn't risk revealing the tape immediately, fearing Gorman's immediate, violent retaliation. Instead, he hid the camera and the steel key, leaving a carefully placed, coded truth behind the bookshelf, a time capsule waiting for the right moment and the right people to discover it. His death was the release of the final, delayed act of loyalty and revenge. The emotional weight of the moment settled heavily on Elias and Maya. They had risked everything, and now they were irrevocably tied to Cassandra's cause. They agreed immediately to help her. They were no longer homeowners. They were custodians of a devastating truth. Cassandra explained the danger of going straight to the local police. Gorman's influence ran deep in the state capitol and the original prosecuting office. They needed to bypass the local infrastructure and hit Gorman where he was most vulnerable, his reputation and his power. She proposed a plan. They wouldn't use the courts yet. They would use the only weapon guaranteed to cut through red tape and corruption: public outrage. She needed time to prepare a legal defense strategy and secure an outside federal prosecutor's attention. Until then, the evidence had to remain hidden. They decided to make several copies of the encrypted footage, storing them in geographically diverse locations, with instructions to be released if anything happened to the three of them. Their plan was meticulous, but the threat remained immediate and unseen. As Cassandra prepared to leave their house, the digital files secured on a USB drive hidden in her clothing, Elias went back upstairs to the attic. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. Taped to the inside of the locked oak door, the one that had concealed the camera, was a tiny, faded piece of paper. On it was written a single, shaky initial P. Mr. Harrison hadn't just hidden the camera. He had deliberately marked the location for the killer to find, a constant, silent, psychological reminder to Patrick Gorman that the evidence was in the house he used to frequent, driving the killer mad with the uncertainty of whether he had missed something. The hiding of the steel key had been Harrison's final victory, ensuring that the physical evidence, the only real threat to Gorman, was permanently safe. A chilling thought struck Elias. Patrick Gorman might have known about the hidden room and the camera for years, but believed he had destroyed the means to access it. Had he recently returned to the house, perhaps hoping to confirm the secret was still buried, only to find the house sold and the renovations underway? Was Patrick Gorman aware that the secret room had been breached, and was he already on the move to silence the new occupants of the house? The revelation of the single stark initial P taped inside the attic door changed everything. It transformed Mr. Harrison's hidden camera from a forgotten artifact into a deliberate psychological weapon wielded against Patrick Gorman. Elias and Maya now understood that Gorman had likely known the camera was there, perhaps even suspected it held evidence, but the lack of the key and the unnerving proximity of the secret had been a constant, torturous weight on his conscience. Now, with the house sold and the renovations underway, Gorman's anxiety must have reached a breaking point. Cassandra, Elias, and Maya moved into a phase of extreme operational security. They maintained communication through secure, encrypted channels, meeting only in crowded public spaces far from Willow Creek. The digital copies of the footage were disseminated and secured, ready to be released by various third parties should the core group suddenly vanish. The plan was in motion. Cassandra was using the leverage of the specific, non-public details from the tape to gain an audience with a federal prosecutor known for his integrity and aversion to political corruption. She could not present the evidence yet. She needed a bulletproof plan to unveil it in a safe environment. Patrick Gorman, however, was already reacting. He was a predator who sensed the scent of danger. His political antennae were sharply tuned, and the sudden, highly specific questions Cassandra had posed during their brief meeting had confirmed his worst fears. The old house, the site of his perfect crime and Mr. Harrison's quiet revenge, was compromised. Gorman activated his network of informants. He began by discreetly running background checks on Elias and Maya, finding them to be ordinary, detritus house flippers, unlikely to be politically motivated enemies. But their purchase of the old Harrison house placed them directly in the crosshairs. Gorman's fear was not that they knew what was on the tape, but that they had found the tape itself. As Elias was working late at the house, carefully sealing a renovated wall, he felt the undeniable chill of being watched. He dismissed it as paranoia until he found a tiny, almost imperceptible scratch near the lock of their back door. It was the mark of a sophisticated tool, not a clumsy break-in attempt. Someone had been there, silently probing their defenses, confirming whether the house held anything of value. The invasion of privacy was terrifying. They immediately relocated the original camera and videotape to a professional storage unit miles away. They installed a sophisticated, hidden surveillance system throughout the house. They were now the bait, and the house was the trap. A few days later, a seemingly random event occurred that shattered their sense of safety. Elias, while checking the exterior surveillance, noticed a large, expensive-looking SUV parked several houses down, slowly circling the block. Inside, the driver was indistinguishable in the dim light. The next day, the same SUV appeared. Then, a man claiming to be a building inspector showed up unannounced. asking questions that were far too detailed about the foundation and the internal structure, especially the attic. His badge looked legitimate, but his focus was unnervingly narrow. Elias, feigning ignorance and annoyance, forced him to leave. Elias and Maya reported the incident to Cassandra, confirming their fears. Gorman was tightening the noose. He wasn't relying on clumsy intimidation. He was using his political power to weaponize official channels and probe their weakness. Cassandra, now meeting with the federal prosecutor's team, faced her own immense pressure. The prosecutor demanded concrete proof, not just cryptic details and accusations against a powerful state figure. She knew the original tape was the key, but she couldn't risk releasing it prematurely. She had to orchestrate the reveal perfectly, ensuring the evidence was immediately admissible and protected from being deemed illegally obtained, the ultimate confrontation, they realized. But in the old house itself, Gorman needed to know if the tape existed and if it was still there. Elias and Maya devised a daring, dangerous plan. They would pretend to be frightened, panicked, and ready to sell the property quickly and quietly to escape the strange occurrences. They would leak this information through a trusted, neutral realtor who was known to handle quick, confidential sales. This would be a tempting lure for Gorman. They cleared the house of any real evidence, but they intentionally left a small, inexpensive decoy camera model similar to the VDA in the attic, secured with a cheap new lock. They knew Gorman's paranoia would drive him to search the only location he knew was compromised. The anonymous purchase offer came swiftly, just days after the listing went live, made through a shell company with opaque ownership. The buyer offered a generous sum, contingent on an immediate closing and a final, private walkthrough. Gorman was coming as Elias and Maya packed their bags. Leaving the house seemingly abandoned and ready for the final inspection, they locked eyes. They had entered this saga as innocent homeowners, and they were exiting it as participants in a deadly, high-stakes game of justice. They left the house at midnight, the silence of Willow Creek masking the intense danger that was about to unfold within its walls. Gorman was scheduled to arrive at dawn. The trap was set, but they knew the predator was armed, powerful, and desperate. Or would his political connections allow him to erase the final silent witness before the truth could be exposed? The house on Willow Creek sat bathed in the cold, pre-dawn light, a silent, empty shell waiting for its final act. Elias and Maya were miles away, watching the live feeds from the hidden cameras, their faces pale with anticipation and fear. Cassandra, positioned in a discreet, unmarked surveillance van with the federal prosecutor and a team of investigators, was ready to move the moment Gorman committed a clear, illegal act. The real videotape, the 15-year-old silent witness, was safely secured in a federal evidence locker. The stage was set for Gorman's final, desperate performance. Patrick Gorman arrived exactly at the scheduled time, not in his usual sleek sedan, but in an unmarked black car driven by a burly security associate. He bypassed the front door, slipping in through a side entrance, using a key provided by his shell company's realtor. He moved through the recently renovated rooms with a chilling sense of ownership, his polished demeanor replaced by a calculating intensity. He wasn't interested in the new floors or the pristine paint. His gaze was fixed on the ceiling, on the ghost of the secret room above. Gorman moved straight to the attic, climbing the dusty, squeaking stairs with a speed that belied his age. He located the dark oak door instantly, ignoring the new, cheap padlock Elias had installed. He produced a set of professional lock-picking tools, working quickly and efficiently, his movements suggesting practiced familiarity with breaking and entering. This wasn't the dignified lobbyist. This was the cold criminal who had successfully staged a murder scene 15 years ago. The lock clicked open. Gorman pulled the door wide and stepped into the cramped, dark space. He scanned the floor, his eyes darting toward the exact spot where the camera had rested. He saw the decoy camera, placed deliberately by Elias, and relief washed across his face, a momentary, unguarded triumph. He lunged for the device, tearing it open, his fingers frantic to find the tape. The decoy, of course, contained nothing but a blank cassette. Gorman's frustration was palpable. He ripped the camera apart, then began tearing at the attic floorboards, searching for a secondary hiding spot. His desperation was escalating. The camera feed showed him sweat pouring from his brow, his civilized veneer completely stripped away, revealing the terrified, ruthless man underneath. He knew the camera's location was his fatal weakness, and now that the new owners were gone, he needed to ensure the secret was buried forever. He didn't find the real evidence, but he did find the small, faded note taped inside the oak door, the one with the shaky, singular initial P. He stared at it. The single letter, a final mocking taunt from the dead man. Mr. Harrison Gorman crumpled the paper in his fist, realizing Harrison hadn't just hidden the camera. He had deliberately haunted Gorman with the knowledge that the truth was inches away for years. The look in Gorman's eyes was pure, venomous fury. He had been played by a ghost as Gorman began to ransack the attic, tearing up insulation and smashing the walls in a blinding rage. The federal team moved in. They surrounded the house quickly and silently, securing all exits. The moment the police sirens wailed, Gorman froze. He knew instantly that the P was the final piece of the trap. He made a desperate, futile rush for the window, but the attic was small and the stairs were cut off. He was trapped. 15 years earlier, the officers found him standing amid the destruction, the broken decoy camera in his hand, a clear act of illegal destruction and evidence tampering that provided the immediate justification for his arrest. As they read him his rights, Patrick Gorman's eyes were fixed on the attic floor, haunted not by the flashing lights of the police, but by the memory of the innocent man he had destroyed and the loyal friend he had murdered. The formal charge was obstruction of justice, but the true charge, murder and political conspiracy, was waiting. Hours later, the federal prosecutor held a press conference. The digital footage of Patrick Gorman staging Victor Dale Alexander's murder was played to a stunned nation. The public outcry was immediate and overwhelming. The testimony of Elias and Maya, detailing the discovery, combined with Cassandra's 15 years of relentless fight, formed an undeniable narrative of corruption and devastating injustice. Thomas Vance was released from prison that afternoon. His reunion with Cassandra was not a dramatic burst of tears, but a quiet, deeply emotional embrace, a silent acknowledgement of the years stolen and the pain endured. The ghost of the injustice was finally XORCISED. Elias and Maya, standing in the distance, watched the scene unfold. They had restored not just a house, but a life. The payoff was not monetary, but moral. They felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing they had completed Mr. Harrison's silent, final act of justice. They decided not to sell the Victorian house. It was no longer just a house. It was a memorial to truth, and the site where a betrayal was finally overturned. The case was closed, the villain caught, and the innocent man free. But as Elias and Maya walked back into their quiet, newly renovated home, A lingering chill remained. They looked up at the attic, a reminder that every old house holds a story. And sometimes those stories are not finished until justice has been served by the silent witnesses left behind.